We're going to continue with our breaking news coverage of testimony today on Capitol Hill from special counsel Robert Mueller himself. Donald Trump, in his first reaction since the end of those hearings, just tweeted, quote, "Truth is a force of nature. For once, we agree with him." And in fact, today's testimony has revealed just a few uncomfortable truths for this president. First, that the obstruction of justice evidence Mueller's investigation uncovered against him is vast and damaging, and it could be enough to charge Trump with a crime after he leaves office. Second, that the Mueller investigation was not a witch hunt at all. The list of lies in Trump's circle about conduct with Russians is long, and the bottom line, the president's claim that he was totally exonerated by Robert Mueller's probe is false.
The president has repeatedly claimed that your report found there was no obstruction and that it completely and totally exonerated him. But that is not what your report said, is it?
Correct. It is not what the report said.
Numerous Trump associates lied to your team, the grand jury, and to Congress.
Number of persons that we interviewed in our investigation, it turns out, did lie.
Mike Flynn lied.
He was convicted of lying, yes.
George Papadopoulos was convicted of lying.
True.
Paul Manafort was convicted of lying.
True.
Paul Manafort in fact, went so far as to encourage other people to lie.
That is accurate.
Manafort's deputy, Rick Gates, lied.
That is accurate.
Michael Cohen, the president's lawyer, was indicted for lying.
True.
He lied to stay on message with the president.
Allegedly by him.
And when Donald Trump called your investigation a witch hunt, that was also false, was it not?
I'd like to think so, yes.
Well, your investigation is not a witch hunt, is it?
It is not a witch hunt.
Could you charge the president with a crime after he left office?
Yes.
You believe that you could charge the president of the United States with obstruction of justice after he left office?
Yes.
And what about total exoneration? Did you actually totally exonerate the president?
No.
Now, in fact, your report expressly states that it does not exonerate the president.
It does.
It sure does. And just in the last hour, Robert Mueller finally shedding some light on one of the most important and enduring mysteries of the investigation, why he didn't force the president to sit for an interview.
And the expectation was if we did subpoena the president, he would fight the subpoena and we would be in the midst of the investigation for a substantial period of time.
Right, but as we sit here, you've never had an opportunity to ask the president in-person questions under oath, and so obviously that must have been a difficult decision. And you're right, Appendix C lays that out, and indeed, I believe you described the in-person interview as vital. That's your word. And of course, you make clear you had the authority and the legal justification to do it. As you point out, you waited a year. You put up with a lot of negotiations. You made numerous accommodations, which you lay out so that he could prepare and not be surprised. I take it you were trying to be fair to the president. And in fact, you did go with written questions after about 9 months, sir, right? And the president responded to those. And you have some hard language for what you thought of those responses. What did you think of the president's written responses, Mr. Mueller?
Certainly not as useful as the interview would be.
In fact, you pointed out, and by my count, there were more than 30 times when the president said he didn't recall, he didn't remember, no independent recollection, no current recollection. And I take it by your answer that it wasn't as helpful. That's why you used words like incomplete, imprecise, inadequate, insufficient. Is that a fair summary of what you thought of those written answers?
That is a fair summary.
The president didn't ever claim the Fifth Amendment, did he?
I'm not going to talk to that.
Well, from what I can tell, sir, at one point it was vital, and then at another point it wasn't vital. And my question to you is, why did it stop being vital? And I can only think of three explanations. One is that somebody told you couldn't do it, but nobody told you couldn't subpoena the president. Is that right?
No, we understood we could subpoena the president.
Rosenstein didn't tell you, Whitaker didn't tell you, Barr didn't tell you couldn't.
We could serve a subpoena.
So the only other explanation, well, there's two others, I guess. One, that you just flinched. That you had the opportunity to do it and you didn't do it. But sir, you don't strike me as the kind of guy who flinches.
I'd hope not.
Well, then the third explanation, I hope not too, sir. And the third explanation I can think of is that you didn't think you needed it. And in fact, what caught my eye was page 13 on volume 2, where you said, in fact, you had a substantial body of evidence. And you cite a bunch of cases there, don't you, about how you often have to prove intent to obstruct justice without an in-person interview. That's the kind of nature of it. And you use terms like a substantial body of evidence, significant evidence of the president's intent. So my question, sir, is, did you have sufficient evidence of the president's intent to obstruct justice, and is that why you didn't do the interview?
There's a balance. In other words, how much evidence you have to satisfy the last element against how much time are you willing to spend in the courts litigating the interview with the president.
That is where we start today. Helping us break it down, some of our most favorite reporters and friends. Former chief spokesman for the Department of Justice, Matt Miller. NBC and MSNBC national affairs analyst, John Heilemann. Associated Press White House reporter, Jonathan Lemire. Mimi Rocah, former federal prosecutor and U.S. attorney. And New York Times Washington correspondent Mike Schmitz here. Matt Miller, I want to start with you on this question of an interview with the president. Jonathan and Mike have both reported extensively on negotiations, on the president's desire, on the president's public statements over and over and over and over again. I really want to talk to Mueller. The reason he didn't do an interview with Mueller is because all of his friends and lawyers were positive he'd lied.
He would have lied, or he would have admitted to facts that would have constituted a crime. But I do have to say, I think there was something interesting that emerged. You could read between the lines in the report, and it somewhat came out in the congressman's questioning. One of the reasons he didn't he didn't insist on the interview by subpoenaing the president is because it would take so long. But the other is he was able to establish all the elements of proof that he needed of the president's state of mind. He was able to show otherwise through interviews he had with other witnesses, through things the president had said publicly, the things the president had tweeted, what the president's intent was. And you could see, if you actually look through the report, that in several of the elements, he could show that the president had corrupt intent in obstructing justice. So while the interview would have been helpful, when you balanced the time it would take to go through it, it wasn't something he needed, given he already had all the proof to show the president committed a crime, even though he wasn't quite willing to say that either in the report or in his testimony today.
Mike Schmidt, what did you hear in that exchange over why Special Counsel Mueller stopped short of subpoenaing the president for an interview?
Well, Mueller explains the balancing act, but you can see the frustration on the sides of the Democrats. They're probably thinking the same thing that the president's lawyers were thinking, which was that Trump probably could not get through an interview without making a false statement. So if you're the Democrats, you're probably a little disappointed that they didn't go any further to try and get that interview, and that Mueller seemed so determined to end the investigation in a timely manner. That was something that came up again today, which was sort of interesting. He didn't say a lot, but if you listen closely, you could hear some themes. And one of them was the notion that he thought that the faster they could get to the end of this, the better. They knew the cloud that this had put over the country, and that if they hastened it, and they knew that there was, no collusion or, no conspiracy, and, there was whatever they were going to do on obstruction, that they should move as quickly as possible to the end. And that was clearly one of their goals. And Mueller also speaking about how there was a cloud over individuals in this investigation, individuals who were not going to be charged, and they had the right to have that cloud lifted.
Mike Schmidt, you said in an interview on the Daily last night that you were going to be looking for Robert Mueller to answer whether or not he believed crimes were committed. Did you get that answer today?
No, he did not answer that. It looked like at one point today that he had answered it in a back and forth, I believe, with Ted Lieu, but then Mueller coming out right in the beginning of the second half of the day and basically putting the kibosh on making any news and clarifying his statement there. So Mueller not making a lot of news, not certainly answering the central question here, which was, does he believe there was enough evidence to charge the president with a crime?
Lemire, your thoughts?
I think two things can be true at once. I think there are certainly some very important things that Democrats are going to seize upon today. Yes, Mike is right. That seemed like a jaw-dropping moment right there. That the seemingly an admission from Mueller that he would have charged the president with a crime were he not president. He then later walked that back, but he still left the door open for the president perhaps being charged with something after leaving office. He was very forceful in suggesting this was not a witch hunt. This was not a hoax. This was a serious matter for the American people.
It's a good point, because he was given plenty of chance. I mean, it seemed to me that when a lawmaker went at him a couple times to make sure he was sure that that's what he meant to say, because that first session that started at 8:30 this morning, he was a little halting. So that was from that first session. And they went at him a couple times to say, so he could be charged after he's president. The answer from Robert Mueller was yes.
Yes, he was consistent on that. He was firm on that. So I think that is what the Democrats are going to really look at. And there was some questioning from Schiff and Nadler in particular that I think produced some moments that we're going to be seeing on cable trouble time and time again. Having said that, the White House and the Trump allies are downright gleeful with how today went. We've seen the president's Twitter account already, but it's not just him. It's his son, Don Jr., it's the attorneys, Jay Sekulow and Rudy Giuliani. They are not just suggesting that Mueller didn't land any new points today, but also criticized Mueller's performance himself, noting that he was halting, that at times he seemed detached and unsure of what was in the report. And they are going to use this now. We're seeing it. We're going to see it again in a few minutes when the president leaves the White House and the aides have told reporters there he will be speaking about this. I think you will see him again using this to attack Mueller's credibility and all of the damaging findings that were in the report.
Mimi, money can buy you a gold toilet, but not class.
I mean, the idea that after today, they are going to continue with this line that Mueller is out to get Trump, that this was a partisan witch hunt, is just, for lack of a better legal term, bananas. I mean, as we've discussed, Mueller came across today as someone who, if anything, did not want to implicate anyone in anything. I mean, I think he could be faulted for that a little bit, but it's also his strength. It's his integrity. He is following the facts. He will state what he can, but he is not going beyond that and certainly not going after Donald Trump. So they can't have it both ways.
Hallman, I saved you for last because I'm going to ask you to widen the lens a little bit. I've been sitting here since 8:30, and I know you started even earlier than that, but that means that I'm staring at trees and missing the forest. What did you see today?
Well, I think there's a temptation in our business to focus on optics over substance, and I think that you'd be foolish not to focus a little bit on this because everyone has said it's the movie, not the book, and this was an attempt to, on both sides, to influence public opinion. And so how it came across does matter. And I think there's no doubt that the Bob Mueller of the first half of the day and the Bob Mueller of the second half of the day were different Bob Muellers. And I think it had something to do, and you could read it actually from his original press conference in May. He wanted to talk about this Russia stuff in a way that he was much more reluctant to talk about the obstruction matters. I think that was exacerbated, the difference between the two halves was exacerbated by the fact that the House Judiciary Committee is not the House Intelligence Committee. And the House Intelligence Committee just acquitted itself so much better today. I do not believe it's a partisan point to say that Adam Schiff put on quite a show. His command of the facts and his legal, his prosecutorial skill and his command of the facts meant, and his understanding of Mueller's psyche, that he could do the most damage by playing to the short, clipped, affirmative answers, not trying to make Mueller say things he was not going to want to say, not trying to put Mueller in a position where he would have to fumble around and look for facts that he couldn't quite recall, but just get him to say things in a way that were made for television. That moment that we played, I think, will get replayed a lot. I doubt, having watched the whole thing, I doubt that if what you were was a Democrat who thought that today was the day where you would need to move the needle on public opinion in an appreciable way that will change the course of history, that will make it appreciably more likely that we begin impeachment proceedings. We may still do that, but I think today will not be the day we look back and say, this changed the game for the people in the country who were up for grabs. I don't think it's going to change any Republican minds who have already decided the president's been exonerated. And I think for people in the middle, they will look at it and say, if they pay attention, which they should, they'll see some incredibly damning facts. In that Schiff exchange with Trump alone, there's enough there to impeach pretty much any president in my lifetime, except for this one. So they'll learn a lot. But do I think there's going to be now a groundswell that's going to radically change the political dynamic on impeachment? I do not.
Mike Schmidt, I want to show you more of the Schiff line of questioning that Hal was talking about. But I also want to put out there something that's in the story that the Times just posted and that I saw some of your colleagues tweeting about during the testimony, that while the conversation around impeachment may very well remain unchanged, some Democrats even talked about today as a setback, the conversation about Russia may be in a different place today than it was yesterday. Let's watch some more of Congressman Schiff.
From your testimony today, I gather that you believe that knowingly accepting foreign assistance during a presidential campaign is an unethical thing to do.
And a crime.
And a crime.
Circumstances, yes.
And to the degree,
and a crime given certain circumstances.
And to the degree that it undermines our democracy and our institutions, we can agree that it's also unpatriotic.
True.
And wrong.
True.
We should hold our elected officials to a standard higher than mere avoidance of criminality, shouldn't we?
Absolutely.
The need to act in an ethical manner is not just a moral one, but when people act unethically, it also exposes them to compromise, particularly in dealing with foreign powers. Is that true?
True.
Because when someone acts unethically in connection with a foreign partner, that foreign partner can later expose their wrongdoing and extort them.
True.
And that conduct, that unethical conduct, can be of a financial nature if you have a financial motive or an illicit business dealing. Am I right?
Yes.
But it can also just involve deception. If you are lying about something that can be exposed, then you can be blackmailed.
Also true.
And Mike Schmidt, your paper's first story on today, I'm sure there'll be updates as we go on, writes it this way. As the Intelligence Committee hearing drew to a close, Mr. Mueller became increasingly stark in his warnings about Russia's attack on the 2016 presidential election and how future efforts could roil American politics.
Yeah, Mueller clearly, as Heilman was pointing out, much more interested in interference and a bit of sort of collusion than obstruction. By the end of the day, he was leaning into those answers in ways that he certainly wasn't earlier on. I don't know whether he had loosened up and got more relaxed or what it was, but he was saying things that were, it certainly could be interpreted as more negative for the president and more sounding the alarm about Russia. And that sort of surprised me that he was going as far as he was at that point. Now, with Mueller, he certainly wasn't going that far. He wasn't, saying, he didn't want to use the word collusion, and he was keeping it all sort of very legal and talking about the counterintelligence problems with Russia. But it was a significant development over the day, and maybe that gives the Democrats some momentum on the Russia issue. Does that allow them to move legislation from the House to the Senate on some type of election reform coming into 2020?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.